Hey Wargamers, Doug here from 2 Plus Stuff, and recently I had the opportunity to meet up with a local gentleman named Ned, who is a fantastic member of the Horus Heresy community. And when Games Workshop sent me the Age of Darkness box, I was a bit overwhelmed. I remember playing 40k back in 7th edition, which is sort of the vibe of the rule sets that Horus Heresy is based on. However, getting into the game and constructing an army is a monumental effort because it's not that it's hard to do, it's just that there's a lot of choices to make and a lot of options, and there's a lot of freedom, but with freedom comes sometimes a little bit of analysis paralysis. So I got Ned online. He is starting his own YouTube channel, or podcast rather, and I wanted to have him on to just kind of discuss what it means to get into the Horus Heresy, how to choose a legion, how to come up with a plan of, like, you have this cool idea, how do we turn it into an army that's physically on the table, and rules and everything to match it. So he was kind enough to join me for a nice long conversation. I would encourage you, please go check out his channel in the description down below. I'll have a link to it and everything. And just settle in with some paintbrushes. Maybe you're building your own Age of Darkness. I'm sitting here building my Land Raider right now. And we can just listen together and learn a bit more about joining the Horus Heresy. Hello, everybody, and welcome back here. I'm hanging out with my buddy, Ned. Ned, introduce yourself to everybody.
Hi, I'm Ned, and I'm the host of the super new podcast, Ineptus Astartes, which is going to be a Horus Heresy primarily podcast. I've been playing war games for a long time, and I know nothing about Age of Sigmar. I don't know if that matters. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. We actually met at a local game store, the Hobby Corner. Our mutual friend Steve had asked me to come over and check out Horus Heresy, and I had just gotten my box in the mail from Games Workshop, and I was like, I want to go share these with people who know what this means. And so I went over, and he actually still has my books. I never got a chance to get them back.
Oh, really?
Oh, well, yeah, in our house we had COVID, so I was kind of out for meeting up with people for a bit.
Okay.
But we're doing good. But anyway, I was so excited to see you guys and hanging out and having fun. And I don't know, you have mentioned the idea about coming on to be able to articulate a little bit more about the Horus Heresy as a veteran player. How long have you been playing it?
So I got back into I played Warhammer through maybe 4th edition and stopped for a long time, and I came back in 8th, but then very quickly was introduced to Horus Heresy.
Okay.
So it's been 5 years now that I've been back in wargaming with Horus Heresy, and very quickly Horus Heresy became my preferred thing. I play some Necromunda as well, and I do have 40k models.
Well, we're going to talk afterwards because I love Necromunda.
Yeah. All right, great.
Okay, sweet. So with that being said, what about Horus Heresy? Because obviously it's sort of like a 7th with some polish in terms of like, you know, the era of gaming. What about that do you like more than 8th when you came back into it?
Well, one thing I'll say is that I was never cursed with the distaste for 7th because I never played in official 7th. Yeah. So all the other horror stories that people have about it, I've never experienced that. So I'm blessed in that regard. But one thing I will say is that when I first got back into 8th edition, you know, the introduction of stratagems and command points was an interesting idea, I think. But very quickly, as I was looking at lists that people were suggesting, because that's how when I first got back into the game, I was like, I want to learn how this game works. I want to see what people do. I want to deconstruct this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the lists that I saw, I couldn't imagine how they would represent a narrative force that actually existed on the field.
I know exactly what you mean.
For me, that disconnect was a big problem. And I still played around with it, and I played it for a couple of years. And you know, like I said, I have a ton of orcs. I actually have an Astral Claws Primaris army because
there you go. I see. Yes, if you can't see it, he's wearing a White Dwarf T-shirt.
It's got a Huron Blackheart on it because I love the Bazab War setting. And then I've got some Death Guard as well. But basically, I liked the Horus Heresy because of the singular focus, in my perception, on the story and crafting your specific corner of the narrative within the larger established lore, and you know, just how much established cool story there was, and then how much the setting encourages you as the player to also like develop your own concepts and whatever else.
That's rad. Honestly, I think that idea is what probably just drawing a lot of people to this exact episode of just, it sounds cool, what is it? And so today's episode, we're going to be hanging out with Ned and unpacking this because I needed a seasoned veteran. I personally, my experience with like 40K and 30K, I played 7th, but I was in a very small town. This is outbacks outside of Seattle, and so there wasn't the competitive thing. I have very fond memories of 7th because I didn't see the nasty stuff. Yeah, exactly. And 8th is kind of the same way. It started getting a little more wonky, and I just can't keep up with Games Workshop in 40K right now anymore. But there are plenty of people who are like, this is a really cool setting and story. I know vague details about some of it. Me personally, I have read most of the Horus Heresy series, so like I really like the story arc.
Yeah.
But actually engaging that on the table, I never got around to it because I never had anyone near me to do it with.
Yeah.
And so with this new starter set coming out, HH2, Horus Heresy 2nd Edition, dropping on us, we thought it would be a great way to have a discussion about getting into the actual game. And one of the things that when we started talking, I loved, you sent me this outline, and I'm looking at it now again, and it's more of an approach to a project than it is a specific game. And I think that that's a heavy thing to emphasize. This is a hobby, not just like I'm building this army to go crush every day.
Yeah. Someone else, and I can't remember who I'm stealing this from, so I apologize, but
it's the internet. It's a wild wasteland. Go ahead.
It's yours. Yeah. But the comparison is 40K is a car race and Horus Heresy is a car show. And when you are if you pick your legion that you want to play, I'm of course going to help you, especially if you come. So this is going to be a feature that I continuously do on Ineptus Astartes.
Yeah.
But if you want help designing a list, I will help you come up with a list that is competitive and that is strong, right? That feels good to play. You're not going to lose because of it. But I'm also going to help you design it in a way that makes the game fun for your opponent too. The best games that, at least for me, I always remember are the ones where something absolutely insane happens or the game hinges on a certain role one way or the other. We don't have as fond, warm memories, at least in my opinion, of when you blow your opponent off the board.
No, of course.
In turn 2. I mean, in a tournament setting, that's your goal, but in this game, that's not necessarily your goal.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big feel. That's the big difference in my opinion.
Absolutely. I recently went to Gettysburg, of all places, here in the U.S. So if you're listening overseas, it's a place that is known for a titanic Civil War battle when the U.S. had our Civil War. And there was a historical gaming convention going on. And, of course, they had one massive table of Napoleonics and another huge table of Civil War wargaming. And it was really interesting because they approached everything with the idea of, I need my opponent to understand why I'm doing this and have fun with me doing it. And so that taking the responsibility of your opponent's enjoyment, if you have that mutually on both sides, that's what this thing is made for. Because you can have stuff that's really good in the game. I mean, there are units in this game that are freaking awesome. I listened to your first episode talking about the humble rhino with the dozer blade. Is that it?
Yep.
It's just good. I mean, whatever. Don't feel bad about taking it. But also, there should be units that make you remind each other of why this is so fun and ridiculous. And I'm here for that.
Yeah. No, I mean, so, and one of the things that, we'll talk about later on as a teaser is that I like to, when I'm designing a list, you think about the things that you're going to functionally need to make yourself be potentially successful at the game, to be able to engage in the game. But then I always like to hit a certain point, a certain, number in my point limit, and then say, okay, with what's left, can I add something that seems a little bit, off standard, or not necessarily bad, but just something that you wouldn't expect to go in this list, and to have it fit in is something that adds unique flavor, or, just so that we're adding to the overall visual appeal of the army. We're adding to the overall interest. It just plays different. It feels different. And again, it's about that engagement and fun for both you and your opponent.
That's fantastic. So I wanted to get that out of you because this definitely sets the tone from what our vision is when we're talking about how to get into the game. I think we can both agree that having fun for your opponent, engaging the lore, and having, I guess the fancy word is verisimilitude, like what you see in the books is kind of what you see on the table. it feels right. It doesn't feel like, Spartan spam, because that, whatever.
That is a good, that's a great word, by the way. But yes.
Thank you. Yes.
I have a friend.
I play wordscapes.
Yeah. I have a friend who has he has built lists before, and he has a list that he has sometimes played, and I call it 2 Spartans, 1 Land Raider, no friends. Because like it is like, and like every time he pulls it out, I'm like, okay, like, yeah, it's really strong, but like
some people don't need to be loved.
Yeah, apparently not. No, I mean, like, and I mean, again, like, there's nothing wrong with, and especially if you and your buddy are going to set up your little Horus Heresy community, and especially if you are coming from a competitive AOS or 40K background, and you and your friend want to challenge each other to build like tough stuff, then just have that discussion or whatever. The biggest problem, I think, is that the difference is that in 30K, a lot more of the matches you're going to play if you go to a convention or whatever else, or to encourage people to stay in the hobby, are going to be those friendly games, and not everyone's going to bring that stomp list.
Right.
A lot of these people are coming from reading the books. I mean, I think that's, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because there is a lot of overlap between the lore and the way it plays.
Of course.
But a lot of people are coming from, that's their primary exposure to Horus Heresy, these novels that they've enjoyed over the last 10 years. And so they're like, I read this novel, I want to play this list, and you can do that in a lot of ways. There are a lot of rites of war and builds that really do seem very close to what you are reading about in the stories, which is awesome.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into it. So you want to start Horus Heresy. There's a few questions we got to address right up top, and that is, first up, you got to pick an army/legion.
Right.
It's not all Space Marines, like many people say. It kind of is right now because they haven't released all the material, but we know Forge World has created rules for other things, and so it's not ridiculous to think that we'll get Solar Auxilia or Mechanicum in the future.
We've seen a roadmap that suggests a lot of that stuff is going to come out in the next 6 months. So if you bought stuff before, worry not. It's just going to take a second for it to get out, but not too long, I don't think.
Right on. Do you have any tips or discussions for like ways that people can figure out what Legion they want to play? I'm going to stick to Legions just because it's really simple for the moment.
No, it is. It's definitely simple to start with Legions, and we'll just go with that. Okay, so one of the things, especially if you've got someone who knows what's going on in the story, is to look at what kind of style you're interested in from previous games. So, like, this game does the way you build your list, it can very closely represent that narrative, and that's what we're trying to build. So, like, for example, when you imagine like a futuristic warscape, do you want to build a list that is about like decapitation strikes and going after quick strikes at prime objectives? Do you want to do something that simulates like that World War I style trench warfare, gritty, in the mud sort of thing? Do you want quick strike, rapid movement, close combat? Do you want heavy artillery? Do you want long range shooting forces and whatever else? There are 18 different legions to choose from, and they have split them down the middle, 9 of them being loyalists and 9 of them being traitors. And that's going to be something, I guess maybe that's one of the first things to talk about. You might want to consider that if you and a buddy are getting started. If your buddy is playing loyalists, you might want to consider looking at the traitors first, because it does feel more fun, in my opinion, to pit those natural enemies against each other.
Yeah. I mean, going back to my historical gaming thing, right? It's really weird when you set up the table and you have Confederates versus Confederates. I'm not saying they didn't fight each other. They did, but also it's not what they were there for.
No, I mean, the story, there's a stake involved, and the story gets stronger when you have natural opponents, like,
absolutely.
I had a friend who, so in the lore, 2 of the legions, the Imperial Fists and the Iron Warriors, just despise each other. And so, like, if your buddy is like, I'm going to play Imperial Fists, I mean, it's worth looking at the Iron Warriors, because it is fun. It is fun to sit across, and as a matter of fact, in that game that you witnessed the little part of, my friend, our mutual friend was like, I kind of like Imperial Fists. And I was like, well, all right, I'm going to go grab my Iron Warriors. And we'll
ruin your day.
And I taught him the game, and, with a little bit of natural grudge match, because it adds another level of fun.
Absolutely. One of the things I always suggest for people when they're looking for armies, and this applies, I feel like, to AOS, 40K, 30K, whatever, is think of your favorite action movie and imagine that scene with whatever faction in there. So like, let's say you want to do Saving Private Ryan when they're raiding the beach. So infantry heavy focused, very speed focused. Like that's taking a scene that sounds cool in your head and you're picturing it and you're putting it to rules.
Right.
And so it's not just a matter of choosing the Legion, which, it's not just a paint scheme or whatever, but getting a sense of what scene or what kind of, if you could almost make a diorama, I guess.
Yeah.
Would you want to make? And then you can turn that into an army. And I like that. Well,
and the one thing too that Games Workshop has done, Forge World has done with this setting, is they've really expanded on the culture, almost like a culture surrounding each of these legions. So like, let's say, I like playing close combat armies.
Yeah.
Well, there's the Blood Angels. They're a close combat army, but they're like these furious knights, they're very splendorous and magnificent, but they're also brutal and overpowering. Or there's like, you could go with the Space Wolves, and the Space Wolves are like Vikings in space, and so they're very so like, have you been watching Vikings lately? Do you like runes? Space Wolves is for you. Like, it's a bunch of guys just running, and they run faster, and it's all about putting a lot of troops on the board and just going at it. Or you can go with like totally insane berserkers and go with the World Eaters, and they're all like, they've got a very like, we were once gladiators and now we're mindless lunatics on the field. And there's other ones too, like the Emperor's Children, which are more finesse fighters, and they're about the perfection of the form. And there are just lots of different things you can look into. So again, like, that color, that flavor mixes in with the design of those units as well. So a lot of these armies end up, a lot of them are great at close combat, but the way that they're great at it, and then the way you're going to express that not only in the style of the play, but also the craft of your hobby and the paints and whatever.
Yep.
That's the sort of thing you need to think about.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm just going to slip in one small thing, is that you can go against the grain. So
yes,
there are heavy weapons crews in the World Eaters, even though all they do is run forward and punch people in the face. Someone's got a big gun in the back.
Someone does have a big gun.
So you don't feel restricted, even though like the legions tend to favor certain things. It doesn't mean they're on rails. So you can absolutely, we can talk about freedom in your army building a little bit later on, but I'm trying to get a sense of what kind of army do you want to make, whether it's color scheme, what they do cinematically, what you envision them on the table doing, and just kind of start to choose a course. I definitely recommend looking at Wikipedias and YouTube videos just to get kind of a brief overview of some of the background. It's so dense. You don't have to read the 50-page Wikipedia on Blood Angels to get the cliff notes.
But you can.
You can. Yep. And that's a choice. Okay.
That is.
Your next note here that I really like is basically specifying models that you want to include. Can you touch on that just a smidge?
Yeah, so I mean, if you know something about the setting or the lore, for example, or like you're in love with jetpack troops, jump packs, which I think are hilarious because they're not exactly jetpacks. They just allow like dudes to like temporarily throw their giant armored bodies through the air. Like, if you love jump pack troopers, then tell me that, and then I will help you. We will design something around that.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you are looking at the Night Lords, and if you don't know anything about the lore, the Night Lords are self-described terror troops. And a lot of their fluff is around them using fear and psychology to, misdirection and whatever else to haunt and bother their opponents before they actually destroy them. So, like, they have squads called Night Raptors, which are specialized jump troop guys, but they have, like, the models have, like, flayed skin and skulls all over them. Like, if you want that aesthetic, let me know, and talk about that and really lean into that.
Yeah.
Find other, ways to add on to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to I've already went through and answered a bunch of these questions for me and my Legion. We'll get through them at the end. So we're going to put it all into practice here in a bit. Right now, we're just throwing questions at you.
So the last question that I had would have had for you or did have for you was, what is your experience with wargaming and painting, and how much do you want to paint, model, and convert? And this is more of a practical thing for like newer gamers and whatever else.
Yeah.
But we all know that there are some colors that are better than others, that are easier than others to do. I was looking, for example, I like the Space Wolves. I was looking at a scheme for Space Wolves Gray on YouTube the other day, and it looked wonderful, but I was having a hard time imagining doing 10 steps for Gray.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
And I was like, it looks great. Don't think I'm gonna do that one.
Yep. No, absolutely. And there's the gambit, right? You can go from crazy clashing colors of mid transformation, Thousand Suns, all these things, or you could be like, well, I got these little tiny stencils for making hazard stripes, and I'm just gonna get a can of lead belcher. Boom, Iron Warriors, and you're like, yep, that's legit.
There is a reason why my first army back after a decade of absence was the Iron Warriors.
Yeah. You have to learn one trick, hazard stripes, and you can figure tools out to do that real simple.
No problem.
Everything else is null.
Yep.
Though, and that's a fantastic set of questions. So just to kind of briefly recap, what legion are you into? What units do you want to include to create a cool scene? And what do you feel comfortable with painting and or stretching yourself to learn? Of course. So I think that's great. For me, I'll kind of go along with this here. I chose Sons of Horus because I found that green scheme to be very, very striking. I've never painted anything like that before, so I want to try. And then as far as on a practical level, units and stuff like that, I personally was going to go with Word Bearers originally. But then I was like, I want to have a set of heroes that I can use as loyalists and traitors. And I love that Loken and Abaddon kit that Forge World has. So it's literally just 2 leaders, but I can use them independently as leaders of my army. So I could be on one side or the other. I was like, oh, I love that idea. So those are just ways that, my decisions to answering these questions informed my list building.
So should I talk about Istvan briefly?
Please go for it.
So if you don't know, the start of the heresy, all of the legions are on the same side of the Imperium of man, of humanity in the galaxy. But to start off with Horus, Horus Heresy, who is the head of the Sons of Horus, he and 3 other legions, they basically purge all of their followers, or I'm sorry, all of their Space Marines and whatever else that they think might not follow him in revolution. Mm-hmm. And Loken and Abaddon, this is the battle that we're talking about. Those 2 characters who feature prominently in the first 3 novels of the series, they get to have a big fight at the end. And Forge World leaned into that and created a diorama for them to fight on. And you can actually, if you decide to go with one of those legions, like the Sons of Horus, this is smart because Doug can now, if he builds both of those characters, and he can play as a loyalist or as a traitor, and keep the narrative going for his thing, which is awesome, which is cool.
Yes, and just kind of a side note, that opens up a lot. There's a lot of hobbying possibilities for having like traitors that are loyalists that are traitor. That one's a little bit rougher, but you know what I mean. Like the traitors purged all of the good people at the first chapter of the whole thing, and so there are good world eaters. They just got iced real quick.
Yeah,
but they do exist, and so you can absolutely make an army based around them.
Yep.
So there's all different ways to play. Like you're working with concepts and then finding game mechanics to make it happen, and it's a great toolbox to make that happen.
Yep.
Moving on, we're going to talk more into actual list building. So I know I want to do Sons of Horus. I got the cool paint scheme. I went and got my GW painting app checklist all crossed off. Now we're going to pick a style of play. And so tell me about army building, rights of war, that kind of thing. That's kind of where we're headed.
So what would be the comparison in Sigmar to rights of war with the analog?
Core battalions is what we have.
Battalions. Okay. So a right of war, I guess, is like a core battalion, but essentially what it is it's a rule that changes. It functionally changes the way the army works. You have a force organization chart, mm-hmm. and you are required to bring certain things that meet certain, just like battle line is troops for this. So you have to bring 2 troop choices and an HQ choice, and then you've got elite choices, you've got fast attack choices, and you've got heavy support choices.
And all of that is listed on the actual units entry in the book.
Correct. Yeah. it's listed on the unit entry in the book. You are limited. You can only have 3 heavy support choices. You can only have 3 fast attack choices. You can have, I believe, 4 elite choices. And you can have up to 6 troop choices. And you can have a couple of HQs. But Rights of War change some of that, and they make some of that work better or more uniquely. So the one that I was going to suggest that we look at first is the Right of War that honestly gets suggested most often, especially to new players, for a couple of reasons. One of which is because it's a legion that it's a Right of War that represents a more elite core unit and group, which means less models to paint if you're just honestly interested in jumping in feet first and get started. So this Right of War is called Pride of the Legion. And the effects of this are Legion Veteran Squads, Legion Terminator Cataphracti Squads, and Legion Terminator Tartaros Squads, which just means Terminators with different armor. They can be selected as troops in a detachment using this Right of War. Any Legion Terminator Cataphracti or Tartaros Squad and Legion Veteran Squads taken as the compulsory troops, which means the 2 that are required to start, gain the line subtype. Now, line is a rule that says if units that have line actually can score, they're the ones that can get points for you in the missions for being on the objectives, which is important because a lot less units have line in this edition than did previous. Any unit composed entirely of models with Cataphracti, Tartaros, Terminator that is normally selected as an elite choice can be included as a troop choice in this Right of War. So a lot of legions have special Terminators that are unique to theirs. For the Sons of Horus, that'd be the Justarin. They can also be selected as troop choice, but they do not get scoring, importantly. Now, there's also limitations. Let me read through this real fast. An army whose primary detachment is using this Right of War may not select an allied detachment. One thing that you can do in a lot of other places is bring an additional detachment of other Space Marines, or in the future militia or Mechanicum, but prior to the Legion, they're too proud of themselves. They don't need no help. Yes, they do by themselves.
We're here to make a point.
That's right. A detachment using this Right of War may only select a single heavy support and a single fast attack choice. An allied detachment may not use this Right of War. An army using this Right of War may not select any fortifications. An army using this Right of War may not include more non-infantry units than it does infantry units. So this Right of War is going to be built on bringing squads of your best, infantry troops, Terminators, veterans, whatever else. But you can also include all sorts of other infantry as well. Okay, so I suggest that for starting lists for a couple of reasons. One of which is because all of those individual models have a higher point cost. And with the box that you've purchased, you can do a lot and get a lot of points just with that box. The other thing is that there is what do you know about the lore of the Sons of Horus?
Me personally, quite a bit. I did quite a bit of reading up. What part are you curious about?
Well, let's talk about. I mean, tell us all about like their reputation as the spearhead strike, or their reputation as the elite fighters of the Space Marines.
Yeah, so I know at one point their numbers were decimated down to a very low number of them. Then they, right? Am I right about that?
I think that happened, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because then they got attached to a whole bunch of other legions, and everyone got a chance to fight alongside them. Horus was there, and they're like, oh man, everyone loves fighting with the Sons of Horus. They're everybody's bud. And so they had a lot of exposure to different campaigns in that way. They're known for being incredibly aggressive up front, like their precision strike, kind of like how all Space Marines are painted in 40K now, of like they are the scalpel and then the Imperial Guard is the hammer kind of a deal.
Yeah.
The Sons of Horus are that amongst Space Marines, of just going straight to the primary target, icing it really fast. And they're also known, well, let's say, like, generally speaking, at least in the first 3 books before the Betrayal, they're painted as very, like, even keel. Like, they're looking at the other legions being like, World Eaters are too much of butchers, and they kind of have a lot of critiques about that. But the Sons of Horus are generally painted as pretty on the level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That part of their lore is really interesting to me because that definitely changes by the end of the heresy.
Oh yes, yes.
By the end of the heresy, they are slavering lunatics, and they're accepting chaos gifts and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, when they start, they're viewed as like they're very savage in the way they fight. Their legion rule is called Merciless fighters. They're brutal in combat, and every individual Sons of Horus Space Marine is a terror to behold. But they have this idea of nobility and effectiveness and the consummate warrior sort of thing, which is one of the things that the Sons of Horus in the story are known and renowned for, having those strong veteran companies. And so doing a Pride of the Legion Sons of Horus army fits, right? Yeah. That idea of having the best of the best out there doing their thing. So another thing, and this gets a little bit more into the weeds of the mechanics, but in this edition, all Legion veteran squads and all Terminators gained an additional wound. They went from 1 wound models to 2 wound models.
Yes.
Which in Horus Heresy is a huge deal. In this system, there are far fewer ways to do what you would consider wound stacking or do multi-damage attacks on a single model. And so giving additional wounds means a lot of extra survivability. So I'm going to read the Merciless Fighters Legion rule here. During a turn in which a unit made up entirely of models with the Legionis Astartes Sons of Horus special rule successfully charges or are successfully charged, the strength of all melee attacks made against any model that does not have the vehicle unit subtype suffers a modifier of -1. And then goes on to talk about models with the vehicle unit type using the special rule instead inflict an additional 3 hits for a total of 1d6 plus 3 or 2d6 plus 3 if the vehicle is super heavy on units composed of models that do not have the vehicle type when ramming. So what this means, okay, -1 strength is very good on incoming attacks. Oh, yeah. And part of the reason why it's so good is because of the way it messes with the instant death threshold in Horus Heresy. So if an attack has a strength which is double the toughness of the target, then the attack gains what's called the instant death rule. And it doesn't matter how many wounds you have, you get hit by that instant death rule. Unless you have something that mitigates it, that model is removed. So your special super champion leader gets hit in the face with a Thunderhammer. If he's toughness 4, doesn't matter how many wounds he has, he's popped, right? Yep. He's a crater. Sons of Horus and this rule, what this means is that their instant death threshold is now strength 9 as opposed to strength 8 when they're being attacked. That makes that first turn of combat, the Sons of Horus veteran squads and Terminator squads are really tough to kill that first round. And that works. That I think that's narrative. It's fluffy. It neatly coincides with that Pride of the Legion rite of war, and it's fun. So that's why I would suggest this connection.
No, I super appreciate it. And that's we talked about that during your demo with Steve, and I immediately went home and started reading up on that, and I was like, I love this because this discussion we're having right now is obviously tailored towards me and my Sons of Horus, but rites of war are essentially just army flavors instead of like chocolate and strawberry, like jetpack focused or elite focused. And then you just find the rites of war that work for that. There's several in the core book that any legion can have.
Yes.
And then each legion has their own to kind of reflect like a more personal, I guess, force is kind of what I'm going for.
Yep.
But when you suggested that, I was like, well, first of all, it looks like it was just tailor made for the Age of Darkness box. Like it's stellar. There's no legion that you can't make a good hunk of points out of that with Pride of the Legion.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, and it just kind of all clicked together of me wanting to do Sons of Horus, and then that rule allowing me to be more aggressive, at least in the first turn, without nearly as many ramifications of just walking into a gun. It was just terrific. And so this is what we're talking about when, in the part 1, you decided what kind of army you want from a lore perspective. You're visualizing it, and then picking rites of war is when you start to translate out onto the tabletop with like, yeah, I can take a whole bunch of Terminators. I can take all Termies, right? And do it. And it would probably be really awkward, but it wouldn't be bad necessarily. I don't know.
Right.
Well, I don't know. It depends on what the opponent brings. If they can open you like a can opener, you're toast. You're toast. But
And that's yeah, and that's and so again, and this is kind of coming back around, but like spamming too many of one thing in this game does seem to create problems one way or another. It both sometimes interferes with the fun aspect or just the system, so the rules break down.
Oh, for sure. I wasn't advocating that, but I just mean
Right.
like if you're really into a thing,
No,
you can
you can
find
do
a
it.
rite of war that leans heavily into it for
Absolutely.
sure.
And one of the cool things, and you're sort of mentioning here, so I'll bring it back before, but you were talking about
For
you
sure.
can do off type or off brand, you can do a full tank Space Wolves list. You can do, whatever you want in that regard, a full Word Bears jump pack list. Because all of the legions at the start of the Great Crusade, which is, the main military offensive that they're setting up for before the heresy breaks out, all of the legions have all of the goodies that are in these books. So there isn't a single legion that doesn't have these things, at least a few of them. And so you can put anything you want to, which is why, like, for example, the White Scars in the story are very hesitant about dreadnoughts, but that doesn't mean they don't have any. You can bring one dreadnought, and it can be a really flavorful and interesting narrative. Something like you said before, you can bring a heavy weapon support squad of World Eaters because, I mean, maybe they're not up close, but give them all heavy bolters or something, and they're close enough to watch that much lead shred through their opponents. They're still getting something out of it.
Absolutely.
But you can add that, and that comes back also to my 1/3 concept, that idea of like when you get to a certain point in your list, add something weird, add something different that just seems to give you a little bit of extra something.
Absolutely. And so from this point, I would say just if you're listening and you're interested, go online. There's plenty of websites that have all these rights of war listed out. Just do a quick Google search for them, and you'll be able to find them. And just kind of look around, like, okay, well, how does the vision that I had for my army kind of fit into, generally speaking, what these rights of war do? Whether it's a focus on fast attacks, jump packs, whatever like that. There's a lot of keywords you can lean into, and that definitely is, like, I think the most definitive step to turning an idea into an army is when you lock that in. Like, okay, now we know what slots we're trying to fill on our force organization chart. We know roughly what points can look like, because if you're taking Terminators, they're chonky boys. They're like 250 points or something like that.
Yep.
So, you can start to get a sense of, like, it's becoming a reality more incrementally from this point here. Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the Sons of Horus rules right now, and so, for example, Justaran Terminator Squad, which in the story they are the Terminators that every Terminator wants to be when they grow up. They, they're the toughest, the strongest. 5 of them are 275 points, and then you have this whole table of options to customize them in different ways. For every 5 in the squad, you can give one of them a special shooting weapon. Any model in the unit can exchange their special bolter for a combi weapon. You can add power fists, lightning claws, chain fists, thunder hammers, or use the super unique axe that they all natively come with. You can put them in. You can put them in a special transport. You can give them land raiders or drop pods, depending on the size of squad. So, like, but again, 275 and then 50 for every additional model. If you take a 10-man squad of these with nothing else but what they come stock, you're looking at over 500 points for 10.
And divorce papers based on their price point. Yes.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Buy small, folks. Well, so the one thing is for you, it would not be too difficult to convert your 10 Cataphracti Terminators into Justaran.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I'm open to that. I was one of those things. I was going to buy some the actual official ones just to support Games Workshop. But yes, I have no problem with that kind of thing. And I mean, they listed all the different Terminator options basically in the Pride of the Legion thing. So it's like, I just leave them the way they are.
Yeah, you could. And because I think so. I mean, this is getting more into the weeds again, but the Terminators as depicted in that box come based with power fists, which is technically an upgrade because the kit was designed theoretically for 30K, but at the same time, you need to give it all the 30K options. You need to buy an extra weapon pack, but there's nothing wrong with taking those power fists and giving them all chain fists, and now they're a very strong, dedicated anti-tank force. Yep. Charge them at a Spartan, charge them at a Titan when the time comes. Dreadnought too, although Dreadnoughts are super scary for Terminators this edition, but yeah.
There's always a bigger fish.
Well, and there's a lot of counters. There's a lot of small counters, which again is nice because I think there is, as a friend of mine, Jacob, who's part of another newer podcast called the Accountability Buddies, which is a podcast that I guest on sometimes. There's going to be a lot of tension in this edition when list building to try to balance out different things, the need of having strong, dedicated units that can take out big threats versus not isolating your points too much in those, Death Stars so that your opponent can just say, oh, I just got to kill that thing. And then everything else is fine.
Well, actually, that's a fantastic segue. So, our next point here is going to be Ned's Heresy Philosophy, which I love it.
Yes.
And so we chose our Legion. We're starting to pick our Rights of War to turn it into a list that it can be used, and also a shopping list, essentially, for what you need to buy to start building, collecting, painting. And so let's talk about when that starts to meet, rubber meets the road and we start playing. Tell me about your Heresy Philosophy.
Okay. So some of the general things, we'll talk function and then fashion, I suppose.
Okay. Yeah, okay? I love it. Okay.
The function is, in this game, there are still armor values. And what that means is that you, as opposed to if you're coming from 40K, you don't have toughness on vehicles. You have armor values, which means that you need to have a certain amount of weapons that are pretty much dedicated to or efficient at blowing up tanks. The way wound rolls work in Horus Heresy are similar to the way they work in 40K. You take the strength of the attack versus the toughness of the defender. If your strength is higher by 1, it's a 3+. By 2, it's a 2+, which is different. And if it's lower, then it's harder. So basically, it's slightly above 50% or less, depending on which is stronger. In armor values, what you do is you take the strength of your weapon versus the strength of the armor, and you roll an armor penetration dice, a d6 most of the time, and then you add your roll to the strength of your weapon. And if you tie, then you hit a glancing strike on the armor, and if you go above, it's a penetrating hit. And there's other tables and whatever else that tell you what that means. But essentially, you have to either ping these vehicles down with glancing hits or get lucky with penetrating hits on certain weapons and blow them up entirely. So you need to have a certain amount of weapons that are I know this is going to be effective against armor versus I know this is going to be effective against infantry, because a las cannon might be a super powered laser that can tear through the side of a Land Raider, but it's only going to kill one Marine. Yeah. So,
super kill, but he's just
the dude's super dead, but you don't get, so you have to balance out your list, which is again fun because, that encourages more diversity in the process. So one of the things that has changed in this edition, and I go back and forth on whether I like it or not, but going back to the Right of War thing, is that so one of the main functions of the Right of War is troop manipulation, which means whether your special units become troops, and if they can become troops, then you can include more of them, and that indicates the feel and the flavor of your army, but it also helps you avoid certain taxes where you have to bring certain things.
Yes.
Well, the fact that very few things anymore have line, which means scoring, a lot of the missions that we've seen in the core book have objectives. And if you don't have someone with line to stand on that objective, then you can't win the game. Now, can you build a list without any line troops just to blow up your friend? Yes, you could do that. And that might be kind of fun, but you will never win those missions.
No, you're there for cheerleading and getting a free beer after a fun game. That's it.
That's okay too.
Which is rad.
Which is fine, yeah. But one of the things that's helpful, especially I think for newer players, is the fact that, let's say you've decided or landed on the Sons of Horus. Now, there is the Pride of the Legion, Rite of War, but there are also unique rites of war for for the Sons of Horus. They have one where they're Reavers, which are a specialized sort of veteran additional unit. They become troops. They have other rites of war. You could take them in a subterranean assault where you put everybody in drills and whatever else. There are lots of different ways that you can play your Sons of Horus. Because of the way line has changed, pretty much no matter what, if you decide that you're going to build 20 tactical Marines, which is just the basic normal guys, you can probably use them pretty much indefinitely. It's not going to feel like you're wasting your time putting that together. Does that make sense?
No, actually, that's funny you say that right in front of me. I did that exact same thing. I had my starter set. I was like, 20 of these guys are going to be basic bros.
Yeah.
Their job is to have a gun and sit somewhere, and everybody else is going to be fun.
Yeah, I mean, you could very easily one of the things I would suggest, there are 40 Marines in that new box, which is just insane. You could make 2 veteran squads, and they're use them as your compulsory troop choices. So they're scoring. That's great. And then you could take the other 20 and make a giant blob of tactical Marines, which are nothing crazy or exciting to write home about, but they're efficient, they're cheap, and they hold objectives. And now you've got 3 scoring troop choices to build the foundation of your army around. And it's really good. It's a good place to start. Then for the rest of your box, you've got 10 Terminators. You could put all of those Terminators into one squad. You could convert 5 of them and have 2 different squads of 5. Make one of those squads an anti-tank dedicated force. Give the other one mostly like power axes and have them for chopping up other, infantry squads or whatever else. And then, basically you can take a look at every one of these squads and say, what do I want them to do? How do I want them to work? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and when you approach a squad, I feel like the line is much clearer in Horus Heresy than it was in 40K, at least the last edition or 7th edition rather, when I played, where like attack Marines can take all kinds of heavy weapons too. Back then, like you have a guy with a last can or whatever, but you never really wanted to pull them in multiple directions. Whereas I feel like in Horus Heresy, like pick a unit, give it a single job, and equip it to do that job. Like TAC Marines exist to cap objectives. They're not there to be hoisting all kinds of heavy weapons and that kind of thing. And one guy in the back slows down the other 19 dudes in the unit. Nothing like that. It's just a matter of, everything has a job, and what you're doing when you build your list is assembling a toolbox. Yeah. And
you mentioned my first episode. I talked about this a little bit specifically with tactical squads. This is the creativity that you get. Like, do you want a 20-man tactical blob with an apothecary that's really hard to shift off an objective? Or do you want to just throw 10 dudes, maybe 11 or 12 or 10 with an apothecary in a rhino and have them scoot out to a farther objective? Like maybe you mix and match. Maybe you get an additional 10 beakies somewhere and make them an additional 10-man squad that is going to go in a rhino. And now you've got, again, more choices. And any experienced wargamer will know that choices are good. Like having choices, having the ability to set and adapt your own strategy mid-game is what makes the experience fun and makes it work.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we got anti-infantry, anti-tank, and then you spoiled it earlier, and your third role I love, anti-boring. Tell me about anti-boring.
Okay. So I just... again, and this goes back to the very confusing experience I had when I came back to Warhammer 8th edition, and I saw lists that were like Supreme Command slot with 7 Psychers. I'm like, what is that? Like, what does that mean? As I'm building my lists, I have a couple of real simple rules. And these are for Heresy. This is for Heresy 1.0, and so this is obviously going to change because I've only played 3 games of Heresy 2.0. But I used to think to myself, I want at least 2 scoring units for every 1,000 points, roughly. I want to make sure that I've got enough bodies to go on the board and cover objectives. I want to make sure that my narrative feels strong. I want to make sure that I've got maybe 3 different ways to take out armor. And then I want to make sure that my opponent has fun, which sounds like a silly thing to add as one of your list building requirements, but it totally is. So
what a world it would be if we all did that.
Right. So one of the armies that I played primarily in Heresy 1.0 was the White Scars. And they had a rite of war called the Chagorian Brotherhood. And again, this troop manipulation thing, you could take jet bikes as troop choices, which meant that you didn't have to have any tactical Marines, and your whole army could be very fast, very mobile, and very fitting in that sort of space Mongolian influence thing that has been part of the White Scars story for forever. Okay.
Right.
So I built that, I had a whole bunch of jet bikes. I had land speeders. I had, a couple of flyers, and, I had my leader on motorcycles, even though they were not very good compared to the jet bikes, but well, I just thought they looked cool. So they were on there too. But then the problem with the White Scars, to my view of it, is the fact that they have the ability to dominate the movement phase of the game in a way that almost nobody can match. You can just split the board, and you in last edition you could run essentially, and your jet bikes could move 24 inches, and suddenly you were here, and your opponent was planning on coming in this way, and now you're over here.
Yep.
And like you flip the table, and suddenly your opponent has a very little ability to interact with you in certain ways. The army was challenging to play with in the regard that, like, if you messed up that movement, you got caught, you were probably in trouble. But it made playing against the White Scars for some of my opponents probably frustrating in that regard. So one of the things I started doing was thinking about, I wonder how much points of nonsense I can put into this list. So I added I think a 10-man squad of, they were called Eben Keshig Terminators, which were very bad in 1.0. And I put them inside a flying brick, which was called the Cestus Assault Ram, which they don't actually even make anymore.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. But it's fine, but it was a very expensive thing. And basically that squad plus putting it inside the flyer, it was like 800 points out of a 3,000 point list. And it came on at earliest turn 2, and at earliest the guys couldn't get out of the thing until turn 3. And so, like, it very frequently didn't have much impact on the game. But I liked the way those models looked. I liked the fact that having those ground troops gave me some cool variety in my list. And, I mean, it meant that I wasn't spamming much more, like another 800 points on stuff that was, again, frustrating for my opponent to play,
Absolutely, yeah.
And for me, that mattered a lot. One of the things that is, I think, really cool about Horus Heresy, and I can talk about Adepticon for just a second.
Yeah, please.
I was able to go to the Horus Heresy Adepticon stuff this March, and it was the first time I'd ever been able to go, and I was so excited to go. The events did something that I thought was really awesome. There were awards, but there was no award given for best general. And instead, the awards were for best painted, best theme, and then favorite opponent, both loyalist and traitor. And I think if I could point to anything for people who are new or interested in this community, it's that concept. What do we want? We want to create a scenario where you have fun, right?
Yep.
We want to win that award where we are the favorite opponent. And where we are excited to hear about the theme and the story that you come up with for your force, and that you work really hard painting it. Now, I will never win an award for best painted, but I do work really hard on my models so that they look nice, and so that when my opponent sees them, they see that I cared enough, because it honors the work that they put in too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's I think a great, not segue, but just the thing, like, as we're talking about now, you have your list, your experience you want to create, and you're sharing it. Like, when you build a list, you're essentially saying, like, what do I want to share with my opponent, right?
Yeah.
When you go to an event, like say, the Adepticon Horus Heresy, I spent a lot of time in the Horus Heresy section of Nova 2019 over in the DC area. And it was the most mesmerizing thing because everyone's just bringing stuff that they think will make the person across the table laugh or, have a rewarding moment in the game. Like whether it's a hero that has all the wrong guns, but he looks so cool, all these kinds of things. And I love it. So it's a very different community mentality. I would definitely warn people, stay off Twitter in general, but also in specifics of the people that you meet when you go to these events and the vibe that they're trying to create. It doesn't translate online where people just debate and argue and stuff like that. So
no, there are some really, really salty Facebook and YouTube communities. And here's part of it. I will say this. I don't want to say in defense, but in understanding of the community. Horus Heresy 1.0 has been around for a long time. And it got, the original creator passed away.
Yep.
And then it was sort of like in limbo a little bit. And there was like, is the game dead? But one of the things is like the people who got involved in this game early on, like they loved the craft and hobby of it. Like one of the things I point to is a friend of mine built an World Eaters Force in 2017 and it still plays decently enough the same way that he can still enjoy all the hard work he put in the models back then. Right? Yeah. That's not typical of other cycles. There's a lot of fear, and I think it's unfounded, that the change of this edition and the new focus is going to, I mean, of course, it'll bring people who might not have the best intentions at heart into the community. But the best thing we can do is just be open and welcoming and like explain to them why we think that this is important, that Heresy stay narrative focused and not competitive or,
absolutely.
That sort of thing.
Yeah. And, I mean, I say that was not meant to dissuade anyone from online discourse. There are some wonderful communities. I just think, I've said this before, Games Workshop could put a $20 bill into every single box of models and someone would complain about how they folded it.
Yeah.
So, like, you're going to have those people online.
Right. No, somebody pointed out, I saw somebody point out a typo in the book. They're like, unbelievable. And I'm like, what do you want? What?
Yeah.
Wake up today. We just got so many new toys, Heresy players. Like, how are you not still in the afterglow of this? Like, let's be happy.
No, absolutely. I remember hearing that when the Forge World books for Horus Heresy were really coming out back to back. Somebody pointed out like some kind of spelling error, and it's like, do you know how much it costs to get like a real editor for the? I was like, oh man, this book you're complaining about it costing $80. It would have cost you $200. Like, it's a textbook.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've been an editor before, and so you're not happy about that mistake, but yeah.
No, of course. Yeah, I know. My wife's a writer, and she gets her stuff edited, and she's like, there are just some times where it's like, is it the best? No. Is it worth several thousands of dollars? Also no. So we're just gonna move to production. Any other notes you wanna touch on? I feel like in terms of like capturing the vibe, how to get excited for a faction and start to implement it, really the best thing you can do is, I don't know, just get a cool idea for an army visually in your head, and then look at the Rites of War to turn it into a reality, and then start building and painting. And I like the way your Heresy philosophy of just, you build your toolbox, and then 1/3 of it is just to do whatever sounds cool.
Like I said, like, okay, so I'm gonna stick with you. Like, we're gonna build. I'm gonna help you build these Sons of Horus, and like,
let's do it.
We're gonna find something weird for you at the end, something like just off brand, and it doesn't have to be like totally off brand, but like, why not get like a squad of 3 jet bikes with multi-meltas? Like, they'll work, they'll do stuff for you, but they're gonna stand out. They're gonna look different. They're gonna be unique in your setup. Like something.
I've definitely been scrolling the Forge World site as we're talking.
Okay.
No.
And I don't know if you want to. I mean, that would be an entirely new thing, because one thing that I would, I guess, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe from the little bit that I have looked through Sigmar, is that people who are used to Sigmar are going to be. Tell me if they'll be surprised by the number of options that you have on some of these units.
Oh yes, very much so. I mean, if you never played Fantasy Battles, which was much closer to this in terms of kitting out squads on kitting out your army on a squad level,
Yeah.
it's going to be very overwhelming, and that's why I think it's good to just get when you decide you want to build X models, let's say TAC Marines,
Mm-hmm.
give them a job, and
Yep.
then build them in a way that supports that job, and then don't worry about anything else
Yeah.
because there's a lot going on.
Well, and I mean, I think we talked about maybe if there's time and if your viewers are interested, we can do a thing where we sit down and we go through those units together and we decide, you know what I mean? Talk more specifically about what you would want to do. And if I can pitch myself a little bit here too, that's
Please.
part of what I want to do on Ineptus Astartes. So I have just Ineptus Astartes 30k at gmail.com. And one of the things that I'm doing every little episode is answering questions submitted to me. So if you're liking what you're hearing and you want some help or some pointers, email me. I would happily respond and point you in the right way. I love to share heresy when I can.
I like it. No, I'm here for it. I really enjoy like the idea of just having that freedom of deciding I'm going to pick something stupid and cool looking, rather than what I play in Age of Sigmar's Bone Splitters. They're like savage orcs.
Yeah.
They're terrible. So if I want to like even have a shot at victory, I have to like do all the most broke things I can.
Yeah.
And I love them. They're so fun.
Mm-hmm.
But having that freedom of like, I don't need to be pedal to the metal 1000% of the time is a little bit nice.
Well, and one of the things that Heresy has going for it, specifically in that regard, is that the majority, like 95% of what you can bring to the table, your opponent can too.
Yes.
So, like, because there's so much overlap in what all of us have, like, there isn't a lot of hard, like you're not going to see the match of death, you know, like where you walk into a tournament and you're like, oh, well, I'll just hang out here for an hour and a half.
Yes. Yep.
And I think that's cool. I think that's fun.
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely terrific. I was thinking about going later on once I get kind of the Pride of the Legion situated, because it's a nice little goal mark of like the first thing you build. I think after that I'm going to start leaning more into speeders and bikes and things like that. I think for some reason the land speeder has been my favorite GW model for a long time, like an unreasonable long amount of time, and it's never been good. I got totally crushed by one when we were playing 7th edition. My buddy Ben had the salamanders, and like he had all the buffs to like flamers and stuff like that, so he would just load them with fire throwers. Oh man, it was wicked, but I've never seen them be good at anything else.
They're actually I guess it remains to be seen in this edition, but in Heresy 1.0 they were fantastic as well, because you could just take them. You could take them at 50. They'd be like 55 points, and they're a moderate anti-tank, moderate anti-infantry platform, and very similar to what I said with the Rhino. It just makes your opponent make choices, and you can move them around the board. And like I said, it breaks up the visual monotony of an army that is mostly infantry or heavy tanks or something as well. So it's great on a lot of counts.
For sure. Sure. Do you have any other thoughts you want to throw out there when it comes to building a list or getting people excited?
I'm sure I'll have about 20 as soon as we sign off here.
Yes, that always happens.
Yeah. But I would just say, find something you like and explore it. The most important thing, I think, with Horus Heresy, the biggest difference probably, is that you want to pick something that you love, because you're going to be encouraged to spend a lot of time painting these models and a lot of time putting them together. And if you can't stand the sight of them, it's not likely that we're going to see rules updates every, 3 months that totally shift the meta or whatever else. So you're not going to be incentivized to unload them, every 6 months or whatever else. If you're, know. And so build what you want, and get help to find a way to make it as competitive as it needs to be to enjoy it, but have fun. This should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I would say, to add on top of that, like, your Legion choice is nowhere near as detrimental as an army choice in like 40k. So for example, in 40k, a lot of armies will lean to a very specific like tower good at shooting. That's what they do.
Yeah,
they don't really do anything else, but they do that. Whereas like Emperor's Children, they're great in combat. They're wonderful. They have a lot of cool rules, a lot of cool units. But if you choose them, and then one day you're like, actually, I want to try building the Rite of War where it's, all ranged tanks or whatever.
Yeah.
Insert whatever. It's none of the Legion rules are going to be so detrimental so that you can't do that. The Rite of
Right.
War is kind of what supplements the fact that this has to be a game and we can all like make meaningful lists.
Yeah.
And so I like that. So there's not a wrong choice is what I'm trying to say, because you'll never be so hamstrung by your Legion choice that you don't have access to everything else.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too. So I guess I will say this. People have been sharing with me the fact that I know there are people out there making lists like the tier list of Horus Heresy legions. Like this is the most powerful legion or whatever else. Be wary of that stuff too, because if you build towards that, you're building against the fun. And also I would take issue with and disagree with some of those things that I've seen so far. But I'm trying to stay out of that world entirely anyway.
Well, good luck. If you're going to get into podcasting, your hands are going to get dirty real
I
fast.
know.
I'm just playing.
I actually so I've done one episode, but I've already gotten an email. Can you help me make a very broke list? And I'm like, no.
Yeah. Just say yes and then shoot him a link to like a Discover card or something like that. Just go buy everything.
Yep, that's good.
Well, sweet. Ned, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on here, man. And I do really want to point people towards your podcast. I'm going to have all the links and stuff like that in the description down below. You sent me your episode 0 early, and I enjoyed listening to it while I was cleaning the house yesterday. So, you had a great voice, great presentation style. From what I understand, you're a teacher by trade. Is that right?
Yes.
It comes through, and I love every second of it. So I really do appreciate it. Any final thoughts you want to do here before we wrap up?
No, I mean, please reach out. I would love to grow this thing. When I'll tell your audience the same thing I told you, is that I started doing this. I've always wanted to do this, but I started doing it because I was asked to teach a class on podcasting next year, and I knew nothing about it. So I was like, well, one way to do that.
Yep.
So Ineptus Astartes 30k.com or Ineptus Astartes 30k@gmail.com. Send me an email, and I'd love to help you out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, and for all of you listening, go check out his channel, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks.
Again, huge thank you to Ned. Go check out his channel, and I'm so excited to have more content creators that, quite frankly, are really nice people in real life, who are all about Horus Heresy and all about 40k. Because sometimes online it can seem a bit rough. So having those real people who just want to help each other and build a really awesome community is rewarding for me. So you'll be seeing Ned hopefully a few more times on the channel. I'd love that. So check him out. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.